So thank you to all of you for listening, and thank you for the invitation. So at the end of this session, I want to return to a couple of fundamental questions which link to quite a few things that have been said by my colleagues Lucy and Claire, but also by other speakers this morning. My first question is, what is the role of languages, of multilingualism and of translation in dealing with a pandemic such as COVID-19? And the second question is, what is the role and the position of children in such a situation? Now, work has been done on multilingual translation, multilingualism, translation, interpreting in crisis and emergency situations. And of course, there's a lot of work on multilingual education. But the issue is, how do we bring these two together, the perspective on children, the perspective on multilingualism, and on language in particular? Now, the first thing I want to show you is this. So the question of languages, plural. The Salzburg Global Statement for a Multilingual World, which was launched on International Mother Language Day in 2018, and of which I'm a co-author, starts with a series of facts. And the first of these facts is that all 193 UN member states are, and most people around the world, are multilingual. And yet, in spite of that, little attention is paid routinely to the question of languages. What tends to dominate in our attitude to education, but also to research, and also to a lot of other things that we do in life, is what I call an attitude of language indifference. We tend not to see language. We immerse in it, we swim in it, so we don't think about how much it does for us. Think about the way in which, in terms of the COVID-19 epidemic, for instance, a lot of the, I'm based in the UK, so I can talk about the UK, but looking around the world, a lot of the information has been based on a monolingual model. If you look at Westminster, it's striking how absolutely everything is done in English. You know, hands up, Nicola Sturgeon always has a sign language interpreter next to her. That signals something, by the way, but not a lot of people tend to do that. And yet, the COVID-19 epidemic is showing increasingly, you know, there's evidence emerging that in the UK, but also elsewhere, everywhere in the world, language is an important factor in the effective tackling of the epidemic and the inclusive tackling of the epidemic. For instance, there is evidence emerging that language may be one of the issues which affect and influence the fact that the AME communities are more affected by COVID than some other communities. So this takes me to the question of what do we do next? So we have a choice. We can either victimize and marginalize multilingualism and multilingual communities, or we can mobilize their resources, mobilize the resources of individuals and of groups, embrace the richness and the opportunity that's come from this. And I'm very grateful to Helen earlier on for speaking beautifully about how translation in this sense is very much a political as well as a social practice. Now, this brings me to Namibia and to what I want to talk about today specifically, which is a project that's been done under the aegis of two initiatives. One, the Transnationalizing Modern Languages Global Challenges, which is a collaboration of a number of universities under the Translating Cultures theme of the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Global Challenges Research Fund in the UK. And two, the Phoenix Project, which is a public engagement project based at the University of Cardiff and collaborating with the University of Namibia. Now, why Namibia, first of all? Okay, so Namibia, you may know where it is. Famously, Donald Trump didn't know where it was or how to pronounce its name. But Namibia is a country with a very complex colonial and post-colonial and decolonial history, which has also left its trace in its linguistic landscapes. And it's a country marked by what we call linguistic superdiversity. It is also a middle-income country, which is very much committed to the development of its whole population. And you may, let me go to this for a second, you may remember that the underlying principle of the UN's SDGs, of Sustainable Development Goals, is no one left behind, leave no one behind. So linguistically, as I was saying, Namibia is a very complex landscape with ex-colonial languages, indigenous languages, and English, which since independence has come in as the official language. At independence, it was spoken by a very, very tiny minority of people. And even today, as you can see in these details, it is on the mother tongue of very, very few Namibians. The distribution also across the geographic landscape of the country is very complex as far as languages are concerned. Now, Namibia today is also at a very important point in its history. Independence was in 1990. And today you have 3 generations, and there is an intergenerational change at this point. You have an older generation which linguistically will have one or more than one indigenous languages, will have familiarity with Afrikaans because of the control until 1990 of South Africa and the imposition of apartheid in Namibia, and very little knowledge of English. You have a middle generation which is also familiar with at least one indigenous languages, which may have had some education in Afrikaans, but which, as you go up the social scale, increasingly, the more you go towards the educated end of that scale, the more they are really familiar with and operative in English. And then you have the born freeze. And here is where English becomes one of the fundamental languages. Their indigenous languages are still there, but very often I find this contradiction when I talk to colleagues and friends in Namibia. On the one hand, they say English is important because my children will need to become doctors, they need to become lawyers, and only English will take them there. But on the other, they say, it's so sad, my children no longer know how, no longer have the means to speak to their grandparents. Now, what does this mean for us in terms of what we're looking at today and what we can do in terms of the COVID emergence that we're dealing with? So back to the COVID epidemic here. Now, Namibia so far has been only marginally hit, but lockdown has been imposed and schools have been closed. They're due to return at the end of the month, to return to full activity at the end of the month, possibly in August. But there is also fear that maybe COVID has not arrived yet here and that there may be a spike or multiple spikes to come. So how can we work in this context in ways that do not victimize or marginalize linguistic minorities and also generations? Because as I said, here language and generations have a complex landscape as well. We hope to be able to do this, starting with Helen's wonderful work that keeps returning this morning and her book, My Hero Is You. Now, and we hope to do this through collaboration with a number of colleagues at the University of Namibia and also with students there and with schools in the private areas such as the locations like Katatura near Windhoek and in the rural north in Katima and Rundu. Here, it's very important to underline we can work online, but we must work also with traditional supports, with printed books. And I was thinking, as Camilla was speaking, about the importance of radio, of course, as a means of communication in these communities. Now, our aim is to create translations of Helen's work. Of course, there are already 100 or 100 plus by now translations, but interestingly, sub-Saharan Africa and its languages are hugely underrepresented in those translations. Again, there's a link here in terms of inclusivity of BML and all of the things that we've been talking about this morning. So we plan to translate into 5 local languages, Oshiwambo, Cherero, Kokoguap, and Rukwangali and Silosi, with the help of scholars who are Namibian based and of the students of the University of UNAM, and then work with schools to distribute the information. Our aim is to create intergenerational networks in which children are not just subjects, but also active agents of education at a time of crisis. They can be invested with a role that builds on and sensitizes them also to their linguistic abilities, their heritage, and sensitizes them to how these are important, rather than feeling disempowered, isolated, or at worst, even culpable as a potential source of danger for their families and their elderly relatives in particular. We hope that we can help them to use their linguistic abilities to play an important part in their own and their families' ability to react efficiently to the virus, and that they can also be part of a more effective and inclusive process of public health communication. And that does not victimize, as I was saying, or marginalize linguistic minorities, but rather we hope that we will be able, starting with Helen's wonderful book, to create intergenerational networks that will implement that multilingualism in positive ways. This is a model, I would say, a model based on sensitization and on the role, sensitization to the role of language, which is needed also in the UK and throughout the world, and well beyond the COVID-19 epidemic. We need an approach to education and to public health communication that is creative and that produces active and social intergenerational networks, which is adaptive and changes with local needs and with local changing circumstances, and which sensitizes individuals and groups to the importance of languages, plural, and of linguistic self-awareness, as well as to the dangers of language indifference. And I'll finish there.